still terrifying. Do you still find it scary ever?
You know, the fix the money, fix the world, bit cliche, but I think it's actually a positive incentive ground for all levels of human organization. You know, so famously, Hal Finney, I think this was the second day after the Bitcoin network started, so you can find a post on a mailing list, 10th of January, I think it is, where he's saying, oh, maybe the addressable market for Bitcoin should be about 200 trillion. And that looked crazy at the time because, you know, there's a ghost town, there were no transactions, no users, certainly no price for a few years. But it's starting to look more realistic. You know, we are about 10 times away, 9 times away from the price of gold, from market cap, and another 10 times from, you know, these kind of 200 trillion type of market cap situations. So, you know, it is getting into the later stage, but you can still see from the conversations with the institutional interest that it's early.
아담백은 영국 출신의 암호학자이자 블록체인과 비트코인 기술의 역사에서 중요한 역할을 한 인물 중 하나입니다. 그는 비트코인 창시자인 사토시 나카모토의 백서에서 언급된 유일한 인물로 잘 알려져 있습니다. 아담백은 비트코인은 디지털 희소성의 구현이며 통화 정책의 독립적인 자산이라고 강조합니다. 그는 정부 통제를 받지 않는 사적 디지털 자산의 중요성을 줄곧 주장해오며 탈중앙화를 강하게 지지하는 인물이죠. 이런 그가 현재 기관 및 국가의 비트코인 채택 현황에 대해 얘기하며 초창기에는 비트코인이 위험 자산으로 인식되었으나 이제는 자산 보존 수단으로서의 가치와 장기적인 비트코인 시장 가능성에 대해 얘기합니다.
Did you ever think in the early days of Bitcoin that you'd be in Las Vegas at the Venetian Casino, 50,000 people for a Bitcoin conference?
No, it's getting pretty big, right? I think I went to the Bitcoin conference the first year after COVID in Miami, and that was pretty huge. People were just basically pleased that COVID was over and they wanted to blow off steam. So, but this is even bigger.
But I mean, being there from the very, very beginning.
Well, right. I mean, the first one I went to was, I think, in San Jose, and it was like a ghost town compared to this. So, like, you know, very few people. Yeah.
Well, it's obviously indicative of how far Bitcoin has come.
Right.
Did you believe that it would actually get to this point?
Well, I mean, in the sort of 2013 era, Bitcoin felt riskier. Like, you know, people will look at other people that bought Bitcoin earlier and say you were lucky. But it felt super high risk, right? So there was a time that Bitcoin fell, it ran all the way up to $1,300, and then it fell towards 200. People were starting to get scared. It dropped below 200 and thought it's all over. Like, it's going to zero, they got scared, right? So people feel things in the moment. So yeah, I think this kind of level of user interest, the institutional interest, the price level, all these things were things that people, you know, were unsure would happen or thought would happen decades into the future. And it's happened a lot sooner than we would have guessed, I think.
So reading the early chats and the conversations around the creation of Bitcoin in the early days, obviously there was a strong libertarian tendencies. It was F the government and, you know, opt out of the system. Now we're to some degree cheering institutional adoption and governments becoming involved. Is that part of the natural trajectory of Bitcoin reaching its full potential, or is there a bit of cognitive dissonance in celebrating to some degree the things that it was created to rally against?
Well, I mean, I think it'll be fine if the governments just got out of the way and say, you know, in a sense, the current administration is more than that. They are trying to bring Bitcoin-related businesses to the US. So they're sort of undoing some of the friction and getting us to where we might have been otherwise. So that's positive. Yeah, I mean, I think you saw something similar with the early internet. You know, it's like counterculture, ability for people to create their own blogs, their own media channels and things. And the governments didn't like that originally because they were used to being able to influence like government, broadcasting corporations and things like that. But ultimately, you know, internet stocks were very investable to traditional investors. So I think that, you know, people don't necessarily have to be like philosophically interested in something to want to invest because they can see millions of other people are. But one thing that I'd say is positively surprising is that, you know, if you go back a few years, people will be worried about, will institutions dilute the ethos? You know, will the institution invest dilute the ethos? And I think what we're seeing is that the ethos is contagious and it scales. So, now you see politicians and they clearly really get Bitcoin, they're into it, maybe they're all in. Of course, it varies, but you can see also in El Salvador, when that first started, people weren't sure, was that, will that stick? Did somebody do some Bitcoin development down there to try and do biz dev, right? But it seems that actually it was homegrown, the Bukeles actually were Bitcoiners and got it for themselves. So, the concept that these different types of people in different roles of responsibility can get enamored by Bitcoin and bring it into their realm is surprising.
It does seem like even the biggest institutions and names at least largely understand the original ethos. We've talked about this multiple times, but the fact that Larry Fink is on TV saying that Bitcoin could become the global reserve currency because of the United States debt,
yeah, I mean,
it blows my mind.
I mean, it's actually a good example because, he's not just selling, he understands it and he's coming to believe it over time, right? So that's not something that you would necessarily expect. You would expect that people would want to sell what the customers wanted. That's the Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan is begrudgingly, oh, you can buy Bitcoin if you insist kind of thing, right? So that's selling because people want it, but Larry Fink is actually, presumably personally invested as well.
Is there any situation with this level of adoption that does concern you? Governments becoming too involved, hoarding too much of the supply, becoming miners and potentially controlling a meaningful percentage of the hash rate?
Well, I mean, there are some more levels to go in terms of seeing how well the Bitcoin incentive scales. It's scaled really far and it seems to work so far. The incentives are holding together. It's enabling bigger companies, bigger entities, public companies, governments to participate so far. So indications are that can continue to be the case, and basically wholesome, dependable money incentives are beneficial for the economy and for society, it seems. So, I mean, I would say that I'm not necessarily in a rush for governments to buy strategic reserves because it's better for the individual to be able to buy Bitcoin, and eventually it will become more expensive. And if a few big governments get into the game, they might start to get into a competitive game theory where they have to compete with each other. So famously, Hal Finney, I think this was the second day after the Bitcoin network started, so you can find a post on the mailing list, 10th of January, I think it is, where he's saying, maybe the addressable market for Bitcoin should be about 200 trillion. And that looked crazy at the time because, there's a ghost town, there were no transactions, no users, certainly no price for a few years. But it's starting to look more realistic. We are about 10 times away, 9 times away from the price of gold, from market cap, and another 10 times from, these kind of 200 trillion type of market cap situations. So, it is getting into the later stage, but you can still see from the conversations with the institutional interest that it's early. Yeah, well, I mean, I think Bitcoin is basically competing for the monetary premium in all the things. So if you back out the empty monetary expansion in the major stock indexes, they've basically flatlined since COVID.
Adjust for inflation, yeah.
So then, basically, your hurdle rate, trying to defend your savings from inflation, should be that monetary inflation. So I think basically what's happening slowly is people are realizing that Bitcoin is the hurdle rate. If you're not outperforming Bitcoin, you're wasting your time, right? Now you got to look at it like a 4-year duration or something because it's volatile, but the volatility has been falling. And I think that's where the treasury companies come in also, because they've found, by trial and error and by learning as they go, starting with Saylor, that you can achieve a return above Bitcoin, which is you operate a company, you put its reserves in Bitcoin and you use the free cash flow to buy more Bitcoin. You start to command a premium because you've got a return on capital, and then you use that, with convertible notes and bonds and at the market share selling to increase the Bitcoin per share. So, people will ask, is that sustainable? Is it scalable? And I think it is, because it's just another form of net present value, your sort of kind of arbitrage on the future, as you were, right? And as scalability, I think, going back to Hal Finney's data, market cap, addressable market, that is the size of the arbitrage, right? It's a couple of $100 trillion, so it's very scalable. It doesn't matter if Berkshire Hathaway, Microsoft, Apple pour their entire cash reserves into it, that gap is not going away overnight, whoever.
Having been literally through every single cycle and through every up and down, do you think that we will continue to see sort of the predictable halving cycles and the crazy ups and downs and volatility of price action? Or do you think that since we are still early on this institutional bid and sovereign adoption, do you think that perhaps the volatility will be dampened into the future? And that could be to the upside or the downside.
Yeah, I mean, apparently Bitcoin's volatility has a fat tail, which means that the volatility is biased to the upside, which is a good kind of volatility, compared to stock, general stock indexes and things. But it's still, the volatility is going down slowly, but it's still like somewhat volatile. We saw the drawback in the last few months was, I think, about 35%, which is kind of relatively normal for a bull market. In prior bull markets, you've seen like half a dozen drops like that. I think part of the reason is market structure. So if most of the people historically that own Bitcoin have ended up all in, or they're at their threshold, right? And so if the price falls, they desperately want to buy more, but they've got no money, right? No fiat left. That makes it hard for them to defend a price pullback, right? Whereas with stocks, there are analyst reports about all the companies. If they think, Microsoft's undervalued, they'll sell some Dell and buy some Microsoft or what have you, right? So there's capital that's just getting reallocated, and that sort of keeps the drawdowns reasonable.
I know we've got to run in a second. I just want to ask you, in context of everything happening now, what's the most exciting to you? What still gets you, out of bed and ready to work in the morning about Bitcoin?
Well, I mean, I think it's just the scope of Bitcoin to improve the world. It's a disruptive technology, and the self-sovereignty seems to be contagious and scalable through different levels of organizations. So, to fix the money, fix the world, a bit cliche, but I think it's actually a positive incentive ground for all levels of human organization, and so far it's scaled really well. So now, and I think, it's as I said, competing for the monetary premium in stocks, bonds, real estate, so this monetary premium is actually not healthy because it makes the normal use of that asset expensive and hard to get at. So people are, unable to buy housing, or they can't get the housing because there are people storing empty apartment units as a form of saving, right? So, putting that into Bitcoin is better. And then the other question people will ask when they get bored on Bitcoin Talk from time to time is if Bitcoin gets full adoption, so hyper-Bitcoinization's happened, would you reallocate, or would you hold Bitcoin? And I think the answer is you would be very happy to hold Bitcoin because this small percentage of a basis point that you could hold is going to continue to hold that basis point of this store of value addressable market going forwards, despite population growth, productivity growth, and so on. So it becomes the kind of risk-free return that preserves savings, and it means that you don't have to take on risk to try and chase preserving your spending power. So that's actually a very positive thing. So today people have to, take on a lot of risk just to try and preserve their spending power.
아담백은 현재는 많은 기관 지지자들도 비트코인을 지지하고 있으며 기업가 저부 차원의 관심이 높아지고 있다고 설명합니다. 여전히 개인이 주도할 수 있는 여지와 함께 장기적으로 200조 달러의 비트코인 시장을 전망하며 비트코인은 전통 자산들의 화폐 프리미엄을 흡수해 기축 자산으로 자리 잡을 수 있을 거라고 보고 있죠. 우리는 객관적인 시각으로 투자를 해야 하고 지금 당장만 보고 투자할 게 아니라 미래를 보고 투자를 해야겠죠. 010-2472-0429 전화번호로 탈개미 적어서 문자 보내주시면 2025년 비트코인과 코인 시장에 대한 분석, 정보들 공유해드리겠습니다. 현재 우리에게 중요한 것은 이러한 정보를 어떻게 활용할 것인가입니다. 지금까지 영상 시청해주셔서 감사하고요. 다음에 더 좋은 영상으로 찾아뵙겠습니다. 감사합니다.